Welcome back to the Management Lab. I'm Sean Hansen from Saunders College Business at Rochester Institute of Technology.
And I'm Uri Gal from the University of Sydney Business School in Sydney, Australia. Hello, Sean.
Hello, Uri. How you doing?
I am doing okay, I guess, given the tumultuous times we're living in. How are you?
I mean, I think we have said before that you are a native Israeli, and so I'm sure it has been a very difficult couple of weeks.
Yeah, look, for everybody who's listening, Sean and I, before we started recording, we got together and had a robust conversation. Is that a fair characterization?
I think robust is a good word. Yeah.
Yes, about what's happening, and I think we both agreed, and I'm gonna talk about this at a fairly high level of abstraction, so as not to get bogged down with details. That moments like this are moments that call for moral clarity.
Yeah.
And I think it's an opportunity for many people that hold various positions in society to be courageous and demonstrate moral clarity, which is something we've talked about before in the podcast. As a leader, an organizational leader, a political leader, as someone who aspires for other people to follow them and do the right thing when the moment calls for it. I think this is a moment for moral clarity, and I've been disappointed in the actions that many people have taken so far, and what I think is their failure to demonstrate such clarity.
Yep, I agree. I think we need courageous leadership.
Yeah. Which is something that we always need, and I feel like in many cases, especially in the last few weeks, we've been in short supply of, which is unfortunate.
For sure.
And other than that,
other than the world falling down around us,
yeah. No, we were talking about the younger generation as well in the West specifically, and how we feel that many of them, anyway, based on some of the stories we've heard in the last few days, are morally confused. And not to draw an equivalence by any stretch of the imagination, but my 6-year-old got she had her birthday not too long ago, a few weeks ago, and she got a present from her aunt in Germany. So we just got it now a couple of days ago, which is like a digital camera for kids, and she's been playing around with this. And for the life of me, I don't know where she got this from. She must have seen this somewhere. But do you know what was the first thing that she did when she got it?
She took a selfie.
Yes, she took a selfie. She bloody took a selfie. And I'm thinking, how do you even have the knowledge to know what a selfie is? I didn't know what a selfie was when I was 16. But that was her first instinct, to take a selfie.
Yeah, that's quite telling. Yeah. I'm not disparaging your daughter here, but it does say something about an entire generation. If your first intuition, when you're given the ability to capture something about reality, is to take a picture of yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm gonna uproot that intuition.
Yeah, that's good. Get on it.
That's my mission for the next 10 years.
Yeah. The issue about the ethical reasoning. So I just, in my intro to information systems class that I teach, I love my students. If any of them listen, you guys are great. But I was a little disturbed. We did ethics last week, ethics in information systems. And I was a little disturbed in terms of some of the, asking them to sort of work through ethical dilemmas. There was a lot of non-answers, and I don't know if that is a question of people not wanting to necessarily put themselves forward on topics that there can be a difference of opinions on, and but it made me uncomfortable. And there was also a certain hand washing, right? Like when we talked through a dilemma about a manager dealing with a moral dilemma surrounding the development and implementation of an information system, and the answer was sort of, very much CYA, cover your ass type solutions, right? Like, well, get someone to sign off on it so they'll get the blame if it goes wrong, kind of thing. And again, this was not universal, but there was a lot of that, and it worries me. It worries me a little bit because every time there is well, we've talked about this in past episodes, but every time there is sort of a failing in the marketplace, a, a controversial issue that disrupts our markets, like in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis and the bad behavior by the banks, or earlier on the financial crisis that was brought on by the bad behavior at Enron, unethical behavior at Enron. Every time those things happen, as a society, we say, well, these business leaders need to be educated in ethics. I agree. But 18 is a hell of a time to start, if we want them to have the ability to work through ethical dilemmas in a reasoned way.
In what was the dilemma exactly? In what sense did their response disappoint you?
So there were a couple of different dilemmas. If you recall the AI, so an association that both Uri and I are a member of, it's called the Association for Information Systems. It's the leading academic organization in the information systems field. And several years ago, they did a guidebook of ethical guidelines, and they included some scenarios. And one of those was a consulting firm that's designing and implementing an information system for a firm, and it comes to the design of the security guidelines. And in this scenario, the customer basically wants to shortchange the security, wants to go with cheapest options on security because they don't want the project to run high. And the CYA type activity as well, the right action for the manager of this firm is just to make them sign off on it so that they get the blame if things go wrong. Yeah. And I tried to point out that they're not the only stakeholders, right? That in this ethical dilemma, the employees of that organization are stakeholders because it's their information that would become vulnerable. The employees of the implementing firm are stakeholders because they could go out of business, right? And there's lots of different stakeholders involved. And to simply say, well, you're the manager, get somebody to sign a sheet of paper, strikes me as a ethically untenable solution or a problematic solution.
So did you confront the students with this response?
A little bit. I mean,
how did they justify their choice? What was their rationalization?
Well, that was part of my concern, is that there wasn't a lot of rationalization. It's sort of get them to sign the paper and then it's their problem kind of thing. And so on that particular stance, there wasn't a lot of there was no ethical reasoning as to why that's the right action, other than that it protects you as an individual, which is not a reflection of ethical reasoning, right? And so that was part of my discomfiture.
Yeah. Well, I think the issue of ethical reasoning has some bearing on the topic that we're going to talk about today. And today we'll talk about spirituality and how it plays out
in the workplace.
Yeah, how it plays out in organizations.
Which Uri proposed this, and it's quite interesting.
I did. So for those of you who don't know, Sean, would you describe yourself as a spiritual person?
Yes, for sure.
Okay,
and I am actually a religious believer. Is this going to be revealing too much here?
It's too late now.
And Uri is not a religious believer. Now, one of the things we're going to note is that workplace spirituality is not fundamentally about religion at all. And actually, it's very explicitly avoided in the religious framing within the literature. And I think that's important because I think it muddies the water to talk about this phenomenon as in religious terms. But nevertheless, I was surprised when Uri proposed this topic as opposed to me proposing the topic.
I was just trying to make you happy.
I appreciate that.
But so, okay, when you say you're a spiritual person, would you divorce that from your religious beliefs?
Yeah, for sure. So maybe I'm revealing too much about myself, but I'm a big fan of comparative religious studies. Like I find it fascinating to look at different religious perspectives. I have my own tradition and my own belief system, but I see a lot of value in those of other people, and I find it really engaging to sort of grapple with that. And so, yeah, absolutely. And I think the framing of spirituality that we see here, which we'll delve into in a second, I think is really helpful because it is again not grounded in religious principles.
Right.
Some would argue maybe fundamentally it is, but it is in this literature not so much grounded in religious principles as personal values, needs beyond the physical. Go ahead. Sorry.
Can I push back for a second? So I wanna ask you another question and see if you can lead us into some of the research that we read in preparation for today. What does it mean for you to be spiritual? In what way does your spirituality find expression in your day-to-day life?
Um, so, I mean, so I'm not one of those people in my own day-to-day life who does that. Does that line I'm spiritual but not religious thing, right? And that's very common where people say I'm spiritual but not religious. So that might be a better question to pose to them, because I do see it as being, ingrained within my entire conception of human values and respect for individuals and all the things that make life worth living, right? Like how do we get along with one another and pursue the good life? But for me, that does have a lot of connection with my own tradition.
Mhm.
So it might be a better question posed to someone who
Okay,
who
so
goes with that other line.
you're dodging the question. I respect that. I'm not going to push back anymore. So,
I don't think I am, but do you consider, hey, here's a better question since I will turn. Do you consider yourself a spiritual person?
my knee-jerk reaction is to say no, but I think we need to be clear on what we mean by spiritual to better understand my answer.
Yeah, just so.
And so I'm I'm gonna be as avoidant as you were, and I'm gonna
More so,
let's
much more so, as far as
let's
I can tell.
let's circle back to this because I wanna pull our listeners back in, and I want to offer some kind of a guideline to the conversation that hopefully people will be able to track as we go along. So
Sure.
I think what we want to start with is clarify what we actually mean when we talk about spirituality in the workplace. So we'll talk about
Yeah.
individual spirituality and organizational spirituality and how it relates to other adjacent concepts like mindfulness, for instance, which many think is a one form or expression of spirituality. So we'll do that. Then we'll talk
Well, I
about the
think it's pretty
impacts.
squarely, yeah, I think that's pretty squarely embedded within this or this discourse on workplace spirituality.
I would
I think
agree.
it is worth noting the distinction between individual
Wait, hold
spirituality.
on. I'm just giving a broad overview of the conversation.
Yeah, so am I. But go ahead.
We'll talk about what it is, then we'll talk about the impacts of spirituality on different facets of organizational dynamics. And then we'll try to tie this back with other types of or other concepts and topics that are related to organizational dynamics as well, like ethics and how we interact with different types of employees and organizations and see where this takes us. Are you happy with this? You should be happy
I'm
with the outline
happy.
since you wrote it
My
down.
spirit is happy with that approach.
Great, great. So
Okay.
individual spirituality.
Yeah. So what I was going to note earlier before you cut me off was that it seems that this distinction between individual spirituality and organizational spirituality are the two key sort of are framings that you're seeing within this research literature. And I will say, when I heard organizational spirituality, my first reaction was, "What is that? Well, like, what does that even mean?" Right?
Mhm.
Because it seems to me that spirituality is very much about the experience of an individual or groups, but very much an individual experience. And so the individual framing, we can start there, is again not a religious principle. It is this conception that individuals, people within organizations, have a need for meaning within their uh, lives, including in the workplace, purpose, to feel like their work has purpose, to feel they have a need for connectedness between individuals, um, a sense of virtue, a sense of hope, these things that I think would broadly be characterized as spiritual principles.
Mhm. Yeah, so it's some sort of a consistent exploration with the inner workings of your um, self, I suppose, that go beyond the mere material aspects of your engagement with your work in the context of organizations, right? So it goes beyond just being entirely focused on extrinsic elements in your environment, like what it is that I do, what does my work consist of, what am I getting in return for performing my work. It goes beyond a utilitarian conception of my relationships with other people, and really, I think it's like an attempt to attend to the inner meaning of these interactions, these things they do. What do they do for me as an individual? How do they help me grow and find meaning and purpose in life, and connect with other people as well?
Yeah. So I'm going to quickly pause and now say this. Within that framing, I would say surely you would say you are a spiritual person, right? If we adopt that framing.
To a degree, because I think like everything else, it's not a binary distinction between being spiritual and not being spiritual. I think there are degrees or gradations, and to me, to be seriously spiritual,
But
um,
you
well, let
okay,
me
I'm
let me
sorry. I
finish.
shouldn't cut you off. I shouldn't cut you off.
You shouldn't cut me off. I think it requires real dedication, right? I think it's a practice,
hmm
and
hmm
I wouldn't call myself a practitioner of spirituality.
So I don't know if it's strictly a practice. I mean, again, if we think of individual spirituality as people who express, so for example, people high in individual spirituality within this literature, within this research, would express a high need for meaning and purpose in their work, for connectedness with others, for nurturance, for hope, right? And I think you certainly strike me as a person who I'm not saying you're needy, so don't misinterpret this, but you need connectedness. You enjoy connectedness with others. You have, you're a good friend. And that means I think people who are good friends are people who know how to, the give and take of a relationship and, and that building a relationship beyond, transactional beyond
Yeah,
mere interactions is part of that. And, as a researcher, I think most of us have a sense of wanting purpose and meaning in the work that we do and the questions that we ask.
yeah. So yes, I don't disagree with that, but I still think that it's a matter of degree. And I really like, and we briefly talked about this before we started, Sam Harris's view of spirituality, which I guess is a on the range of views on spirituality. I guess his view is more of a scientific kind of what it means to be spiritual. But the way he describes it is like a persistent, deliberate practice of self-exploration,
hmm
and in order to understand the nature of your own subjective experiences and consciousness.
Yeah,
And I,
yeah. And
you know,
specifically to move toward a rejection of the principle of an I, right? Of the ego, of the self.
yeah, I think that's kind of the outcome of this process, to understand that the ego is just an illusion, according to, based on this view. Now,
Yeah.
if
It
you,
seems that he does not express explicit adherence to Buddhist philosophy, but he seems so Buddhist to me, right? In his philosophy. I mean, certainly in his practice, my understanding is he now has one of the most popular meditation platforms available online, right? He has a service, a daily, online meditation service that my understanding is it's hugely popular.
hmm,
And I think a lot of that practice builds on Buddhist practice, meditation practice, and certainly, the rejection of the self and the ego is certainly core to Buddhist philosophy.
yeah. So, based on that definition, I would not describe myself as a spiritual person. I would like to become
Yeah.
more. And honestly, in reading for today, especially the stuff on mindfulness, which we'll touch on in a few minutes, there's so many obvious, tangible, real, substantial benefits to being
hmm
a practitioner that it really made me think like I should get into this more seriously.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I do some meditation and I find it very efficacious.
So, okay, so we talked
But I
about
agree.
individual
So that's the
spirituality.
individual.
Yeah. So how do we extrapolate from the individual to the organization?
Yeah. So my understanding, again, based on this research, is that organizational spirituality then, which does seem like a slightly strange framing to me, but is the degree to which an organizational environment recognizes and explicitly acknowledges values like personal growth and development, like nurturance, like support for individuals, serving and sharing, embraces the concept of meaning within work and tries to reinforce the idea that that organizational environment believes in the meaningfulness of what is done there.
Yeah. So one of the papers that we looked at defined organizational workplace spirituality as an individual's perception of the spiritual values within an organizational setting. And a couple of the ways that they measured it is by asking people to note the degree to which they agree with statements like, in this organization, there's a sense of the sacredness of life. We are urged to set aside time for personal reflection and growth in this organization. So statements like this. So the degree to which people agree with them is indicative of the degree of organizational spirituality that exists within a given setting.
Yeah,
which kind of makes sense to me.
All this literature is that the measures, right, in social science, well, in any science, right, the way you measure something, the way you operationalize something is key. And it does seem to me that across this literature, the measures are perceptual, meaning we're asking individuals to say, what's the degree of spiritual meaning or purpose that they see in their own organizations, right?
And are you saying this as a point of criticism?
No, it seems like it's very consistent in terms of the measures, and it has to be measured at an individual level. I mean, I could imagine other measures, right? You could imagine other measures like the degree to which an organization, prominence of messaging around values within an organization's strategic documents, policy statements, articulation of core values, that sort of thing.
Yeah. I mean, we've seen subjective measures of different types of phenomena, like, even financial performance or productivity or stuff like that, which one would think would be more accurately measured through objective measures like various financial indicators. But it strikes me then that in the case of a phenomenon like spirituality, which is a fundamentally subjective phenomenon, these sort of perceptual measures are actually warranted.
Yeah, I agree. I would actually be much more critical of perceptual measures for those other things like organizational performance. If we say, how well do you think this organization works? And everyone says it's the greatest organization on earth, but it doesn't make money and it's like operationally dysfunctional, then that's not really a good measure. Whereas for this one, I agree, it does seem more appropriate, but it strikes me that that's not the only way one could measure those things. Could measure organizational spirituality as it's being defined here.
Yeah. And like we said, one of the perhaps most prominent in the West anyway, expressions of spirituality, not just in organizations, beyond in the last few decades, has been mindfulness. Right? And which is like a very close cousin of spirituality, or maybe a slightly like a tangible instantiation of spirituality. And obviously many people practice mindfulness and read books about mindfulness and meditate. And interestingly, there's actually some really good research that demonstrates very real relationships between mindfulness and a range of physical, physiological, psychological, and behavioral impacts in ways that can have very beneficial consequences for organizations. So I guess we'll touch on those next, right?
Yeah. And actually, I think it's worth noting that even mindfulness, the one question is, how do you define that, right? Like if we're going to be good about this treatment, we might want to think about how we sort of define our terms. And again, mindfulness, it's a little tricky because it does have a long track record or history within Buddhist philosophy and Buddhist framing. But I think here in mindfulness, do you think it's fair to use a definition like clear-minded? This is one from one of the papers we looked at is by, is Darren not the first author on this?
He was the first.
Yeah, good et al. So this is I referred to him by his first name because Darren Good is the first author on the paper, and he was actually a doctoral student at Case Western Reserve University at the same time that Uri and I were doctoral students there in a different program. So this is Good et al. In the Journal of Management, 2015. And the article is called Contemplating Mindfulness at Work, an Integrative Review. And it is a review article, meaning it seeks to integrate lots of research on mindfulness in the workplace. And I think their definition was clear-minded attention to and awareness of what is perceived in the present. Oh, maybe that's the bad definition. You have a better one here?
So they say a few things about mindfulness. So clear-minded attention to and awareness of what is perceived in the present, an apprehension of the current state of the mind that monitors that focused attentiveness, and receptive attention to and awareness of present events and experiences. So I think it's, basically a very careful and deliberate attention to what's happening around you and constant
and
monitoring.
Within you.
Yes,
and within you, including your own emotional states. Yeah.
And constant monitoring of your reactions to what's happening around you. So it's this hyper awareness to how you respond to your surroundings.
Yeah, yeah. And in that particular paper, I thought one of the really interesting things is they noted that mindfulness can be conceived of in a couple of different ways: as a trait of individuals, as a state of mind of individuals, as a practice, as you noted, that mindfulness is actually something that can be engendered and practiced in various ways. And then lastly, as an intervention, where apparently quite a few organizations, I was interested to find that Google, they note organizations such as Google, Aetna, Mayo Clinic, and the U.S. Army use mindfulness training to improve workplace functioning. So they actually train their members of the organizations in mindfulness and mindfulness practice. So in that case, it would be an intervention where you're trying to engender that.
Now, when they talk about trait mindfulness, what does that mean exactly?
With respect to trait measures, they just note that there are self-report measures that include trait measures. There's something referenced here as the 5-factor mindfulness questionnaire, the mindful attention awareness scale. I must admit, I have not gone and delved into those instruments, so I don't know exactly what the items are on those instruments.
Yeah, so they consist of observing, the ability to observe present moment experiences, describing, the ability to describe these experiences, acting with awareness, non-judging, the ability to be non-judgmental of present moment experiences, and non-reactivity, the ability to be non-reactive to present moment experiences. These are the 5 facets.
Okay, got it. And then practices would be something more like actual activities like reflecting, centering on one's breathing, explicitly trying to take a moment to focus on activities and concentrate on the activity one is doing in the moment. So just directed focus on the present and enacting whatever your work is within the present moment.
And just to be clear, whenever we talk about mindfulness, and correct me if your reading was different to mine, this is an individual level construct, right? This is something that individuals can have to various degrees or varying degrees.
Right. So it is more like that individual spiritual. I think it would be a valid subset of the individual spirituality, where they don't talk about mindfulness of organizations. However, there is quite a bit of research on organizations promoting mindful practices, or again, implementing interventions like training to enhance mindfulness.
Right. Do we want to talk about some of the consequences of mindfulness?
I think we should talk about the consequences of all of it. And the big takeaway is it seems like there's a lot of benefits that flow from all of these constructs. We could certainly start with the mindfulness.
Right. So the review paper you mentioned before by Darren and his buddies, they outline a long list of benefits along different types of categories that stem from mindfulness. So they talk about the impact of mindfulness on attention, that it reduces mind wandering, right? When you keep thinking about different things and you can't focus on a single thing. So mindfulness helps with that. It helps improve attentional control, right? Reducing attention to distracting information, like the pop-up message I just got on my screen from on my email that completely cut off my my train of thought.
That's going to ruin our podcast.
I'm bouncing back. I'm bouncing back.
I trust you.
Attentional efficiency. So we're better able to focus on what's important and kind of ignore what is a distraction at the present moment. It also improves various cognitive capacities, right? So it improves our working memory capacity. It increases cognitive flexibility, right? The ability to generate novel perspectives and responses, thereby leading to creativity.
Mm-hmm.
It also has a relationship with various emotional facets. It shortens the emotional life cycle, right? So it speeds up recovery from negative emotions after they're experienced, both after a mood induction and public speaking. It reduces emotional reactivity. So it lessens threat-related neural activation among mindful individuals. For instance, after viewing faces expressing negative emotions, right? So it reduces the reactivity, and it also generally arouses
So wait,
or allows.
wait? Let's stop on that one. How do we understand that neural reactivity? So the idea is that when you encounter some stress-inducing or emotionally intense stimuli, you're more capable of integrating it in a stable way and sort of responding in a reasonable way rather than in an emotionally challenging or problematic way.
Yes, or to put it colloquially, you don't freak out when you see bad
Yeah, you
stuff.
don't freak out. That's the better summary than mine.
There's also, and by the way, everything that I'm saying now, that all this list is all research backed, right? So because this is a review article, each individual piece of information here is basically goes back to a different study that was conducted, an empirical study. So everything is research based here, which is
Multiple studies. In most of
yeah,
these cases, they're citing several different studies that basically enforce those positive effects.
yeah.
Um,
There's
they
also
also talk
effects.
about a lot of positive relational effects in terms of team coordination, improved conflict management. So when there's conflict within groups, that conflict is management of that conflict is improved. Um, Other orientation is improved, so you can be more sensitive to the needs of others within a group setting. It can engender better shared mental models so that members of a team can sort of get to agreement and common vision around their work more effectively.
Yeah. It also promotes greater empathy and compassion to other people. Um,
Yeah.
and as a leader, it pays off to increase your ability to exercise mindfulness as well, because there are studies that show that leaders trait mindfulness is positively associated with their employees' work-life balance, with job satisfaction, with citizenship behavior, and job performance as well. And it's negatively related to employee exhaustion and deviance, right? These are
Yeah,
employees of
which
leaders
that's
with high levels of trait mindfulness.
right, right. And I think actually this is why a lot of these effects that they're noting for mindfulness relate to these broader principles of individual and organizational spirituality, because you're seeing similar things there. We don't have to jump to that just yet, but similar things there where you know the people's satisfaction within their work environment, their commitment to the organization, things like that are greatly reinforced.
Yeah, but this particular study is interesting in the sense that you don't even have to be mindful yourself. Just having a mindful leader can have all these cascading positive impacts on other people, which I thought was very
Mm-hmm.
interesting.
Yeah, well, and I think that gets back to this idea like enhancing other orientation. I think one of the clear implications is that for leaders to be cognizant of their own emotional reactions to things, their own experiences in the moment, helps them to recognize the needs of others,
Yeah.
right? If you're leading a team and the ability to sort of contemplate and reflect on what's happening within the team, whether it's interpersonal dynamics, the needs of an individual, um, the communication or lack thereof within the team, uh, you're in a better position to really manage those in a very conscious way if you're adopting this reflective practice.
Yeah. Another thing to point out is we talked about emotional regulation, how being mindful can help one improve their their emotional regulation in terms of dealing with negative or stressful experiences. And in an organizational context, studies have shown that this greatly contributes to the idea of, to the construct, the concept of resilience, which many people have talked about a lot in the last few years, right? This capacity to, as an individual, and of course you could extrapolate from this to an organization as well, but as an individual, it's your capacity to deal with stressful, difficult testing situations. And in an
and it
era
contributes to the. Oh,
where
sorry,
everyone
go ahead.
talks about, digital disruption and how organizations have to change quickly, and radically oftentimes, the capacity to show resilience is extremely important. And if mindfulness can be, a boost in that perspective, that's super important.
Yeah, and on a related front, both leadership, mindfulness and leadership, but also mindfulness in individuals, is also tied to this sort of climate of safety. And I think this gets back to that, definitely takes us back to that organizational spirituality construct, where it's creating sort of a climate where people feel safe in expressing their perspectives, their own voice. Um, they're able to, separate themselves a little bit from whatever's happening, so they don't feel like any given uh, event within the organization has to be a threat to their own identity or something of that nature. And so their willingness to sort of trust others and express their own voice, and feel safe within their work environment is reinforced by these practices.
Yeah, this kind of takes me to the start of the conversation, and perhaps part of the conversation that we had before we hit the record button on, the fragility of our younger generations today, and their need for safety. But it seems to me that their need for safety, at least the way it's expressed publicly, is mostly oriented towards an outside locus. So they expect other people to moderate or monitor their behavior to make themselves feel safe, rather than find the tools and the capacity to feel safe from within themselves. So I
Yeah, that's
think
interesting.
if mindfulness can help in that way, again, that's another very positive effect that it has.
Yeah, I do think safety on that front, we might need to disentangle some of the ways in which it's used in the contemporary moment, because I think there is a real rhetorical element to the way people talk about safety. I think a lot of times it's used as a rhetorical tool to sort of debate or argue with others. And I don't know that that rhetorical use of the principle of safety is the same as, well, like you said, engendering a sense of confidence in oneself and one's own perspectives, and feeling empowered, maybe we would say, within an organizational environment.
Mm-hmm. Right. So I think there's very broad, overwhelming support for the notion that mindfulness has various beneficial outcomes in organizations. Oh, by the way, one thing that we didn't mention, which is related to the other stuff that we talked about, but just to be explicit about this, there's also studies that demonstrate a positive relationship between mindfulness and various forms of organizational performance or employee performance.
So actually, let's use that as a lever to talk about this broader concept of individual or organizational spirituality and organizational performance, because I think that all flows in together. A lot of those outcomes seem consistent with me.
Okay,
To
but you
me.
want to go through these real quick and then
Sure.
tie these
Yeah.
to general spiritual. So okay, so trait mindfulness was in one study was associated with job performance among restaurant servers and supervisors. Middle managers receiving mindfulness training, so that's the other dimension of mindfulness, exhibited large improvements in supervisor rated job performance in a different study. And a third study found higher trait mindfulness amongst clinicians. It found that to be associated with more favorable patient ratings of communication quality and overall satisfaction. So again, there's a range of tangible positive effects of high levels of mindfulness.
Yeah. And I have a little interesting illustration of that just happened today. I was particularly with respect to the restaurant one, I was at a Tim Hortons. For those of you not from the Northeast of US, the Tim Hortons is a coffee shop. So think Dunkin' Donuts, Starbucks. You choose the coffee shop of your preference. And I placed an order, and it had one of those screens where I can see the customer can see the order as it's being inputted by the staff member. And And it was very clear that it was going in inaccurately, at least from my perspective. And so I said, that says triple triple. And usually at Tim Hortons, triple triple means three cream, three sugar. But I wanted Splenda. And so I'm like, that says triple triple. I think it's wrong. And the lady got really defensive. And I'm just trying to make sure I get the right coffee, right? And then I'm watching her make the coffee, and she clearly picks up a medium cup, and I ordered a large coffee. And so I said, that one's not mine, right? And she's like, no, this is yours. And I'm like, I ordered a large coffee. And I was trying to be as non-confrontational as possible. And she was so clearly getting annoyed, right? She was like upset with me. And from my perspective, it's like, I just want to make sure I get the right coffee. And I think that's one of those where maybe a little mindfulness might have helped, right? Number one, I probably would have gotten the right size coffee in the first place. But number two, she could disconnect me asking these questions from an attack on her as an individual, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's a bad illustration, but that's the first thing I thought of. Yeah. Yeah. But that is, yeah, I think there's certain, when I see the restaurant example was really clear to me, because I've often had people where I thought the service was just so bad, and I was, as a customer, I was trying to be nice, but like, it's like, good Lord, like, I don't think any of the things I've asked for is unreasonable, and you're treating me like I'm Attila the Hun.
Well, I wasn't there obviously, but in her defense,
Yeah.
you have an imposing presence, and people sometimes perceive you as they don't know you for, to be the cuddly bear that I know you to be. They just see
That's
a
right.
huge
That's right.
redhead person
That's right.
casts
Yes.
a long shadow.
Okay.
So
So yeah, lots of significant organizational impacts on organizational performance that come from this.
from
And again, I think
mindfulness,
that was what, sorry?
from mindfulness.
From mindfulness, yeah. But I think that's also, again, consistent with these broader concepts of organizational spirituality and individual spirituality. In reading through this literature, it seems that both personal spirituality and organizational spirituality, these measures that we've been discussing, have a positive impact on organizational performance, on things like commitment to the work, the commitment of individuals to the organization, desire for good outcomes, improved creativity and initiative taking and problem solving, sense of community, both perceived and objective measures of organizational performance. All those things are contribute. The individual piece has some impact, but it seems smaller. Whereas the organizational spirituality seems to have a very substantive impact on those things. Meaning, if people perceive their organization as a place where values are prominent and adhered to, the value of individuals and the development of individuals is important, where contribution and meaning is consistently reinforced, then the impact on performance is enormous. People are more committed to those organizations. They want to see them succeed. They want to be a part of them.
Mm-hmm.
They want to stick around.
Yeah, so there was this one study that we saw from Kolodinsky et al. that saw a significant impact on organizational spirituality on things like job involvement,
Mm-hmm.
right? The degree of active participation in one's job, or the degree to which self-esteem or self-worth is derived or affected by one's perceived performance level, right? So organizational spirituality was positively related to job involvement, to organizational identification, right? The degree to which we derive our own personal identity from our job, with reward satisfaction, and it was negatively associated.
Reward satisfaction meaning, are you happy with the way in which you get paid or otherwise rewarded with whatever incentives are offered within the organization?
Yeah, and it was negatively associated with organizational frustration, right? Which is this negative sense of involvement at work, that you're frustrated with whatever you're doing in the workplace.
Yeah,
so
which I think might be tied also to concepts like burnout.
Yeah, and that study found, interestingly, like you said, that personal spirituality was mostly insignificantly related to all these outcome variables, meaning it didn't really make an impact one way or the other.
I mean, there was some, but it was a much lower level
Yeah.
Impact, I think, across the board.
Yeah. What do we make of this? What's the implication of this finding, do you think?
So I think people are accustomed to coming into a workplace and having their own sense of values and perceptions, and that wouldn't necessarily shift across organizations. But if they feel they're in an organizational context that nurtures that or mirrors that, matches that sense of values and concern, um, then that's the real reinforcement, right? That's what's going to really make them committed to their work and willing to offer their whole selves,
Mm.
or their mind and efforts to the organization's broader objectives.
So that's interesting. So it's the degree, would you say a degree of the match between the person and the organization in terms of their like spiritual expectations or capacity or willingness to allow spiritual expression in the workplace?
Yeah, that's my perception. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's interesting because in our field of information systems, we're talking about task technology fit,
Hmm.
right? The degree to which technology fits the task for which it's meant to within which it's meant to be used. But that's a different kind of fit that we're talking about here. It's the fit between the person and their expectation and the organization and its willingness or capacity to allow individuals the space to express whatever it is that they want to achieve in the workplace. So that plays a very important role in all these outcome variables that we saw. That's a good. I think I'm happy with this interpretation. I think it makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I mean, just intuitively, you have this feeling that, people's involvement. I mean, our work lives are a huge part of our lives, right? Like just in pure hours. And so I think people feeling that their work environment reinforces their broader. Sam Harris would not be comfortable with me saying sense of self, I imagine, but I'll use it anyway. Um, I think the degree to which the work environment reinforces that sense of self, I think, has big implications for their commitment and their involvement in their work. Did you see any negative outcomes here? So I think as we look across this literature, I see tons of upside. Lots of very clear and again empirically validated benefits that come with organizational spirituality and mindfulness, but I didn't see any points of critique.
You're right. I haven't seen any study that mentioned any negative outcome from spirituality or mindfulness for that matter.
Yeah. So lots of upside, no apparent downside. Before we go to our takeaways, I think it might be worth just reflecting for a minute on how this relates to. It occurred to me that this topic relates quite strongly with a number of the topics we've covered already.
Mm.
ESG, for example, right? So environmental, social, and governance. That this whole idea of organizational spirituality aligns very much with that, around this idea that of organizations contribute, doing good, or whatever the Kofi Annan um,
Right.
uh, phrase was that kicked off the ESG movement. But this idea of organizations trying to embrace a sense of meaning, and that it has real benefits in terms of the engagement of their employees.
Not just meaning, it's also if you think about spiritual based on the dimensions we mentioned before. So spirituality encompasses interconnectedness and
Mm-hmm.
community. And to the degree that you have employees within the organization that actively think and reflect of these notions and what it means, not just as an individual to be interconnected to other individuals, but for an organization to be part of a community and connected to other communities and other organizations, not just in your immediate vicinity but beyond. One would think it will be positively associated with notions of ESG. And I wonder if there are studies that look at this. I haven't looked for those studies, but my intuition is that if you looked into this relationship, it would probably be positive.
Pretty strong. Yeah, I agree. I haven't seen that either, but I would expect that to be the case as well. I think these topics also relate to our discussion of very early in our series, managing Gen Z, that we have heard consistently, and the research seems to suggest that the the newest generation in the workforce, Gen Z, even though we have now questioned their ethical reasoning, but they seem to um, desire meaning in the workplace. They very clearly express that they want their careers to be something where there is a sense of purpose and not just pursuing, you know,
Yeah, I
the
think that's a
dollar.
good point. I haven't thought about it that way. I do wonder. So I know mindfulness has become increasingly popular in the West in the last couple of decades, but I wonder what is the degree of uptake of mindfulness and mindful practices amongst younger generations. My sense has always been, and it's not well substantiated, it's just kind of a, based on my own very partial experiences, it's more of an older generation. It's all the older generations that are into mindfulness. Do you have any intuition about this at all?
Um, that's a good. I
Yeah.
don't. My intuition would be that younger generations are not very practiced in mindfulness or meditation. I mean, that's a good question. Maybe before our next episode, we can do a little digging and see who are the biggest users of Sam Harris's waking up service. My guess is it's going to be middle-aged people.
Yeah.
Um, uh, but I don't have good evidence to support that, so that might be one worth looking up.
But
Oh, total aside, in one of our previous ones on ethicality, I said I think women tend to be nicer than men.
yeah,
Um,
I
and
remember
that
that.
women tend to be more pro-social. I did follow up by looking into the research, and I think it appears to be an unfounded assumption on my part that it does not appear that overall women are more pro-social than men in the research literature.
So we're equally bad in that respect, or equally
Jerky.
good.
We're all jerks.
We all jerks.
Yeah.
But going back to the point you made before, I think it's very interesting, especially given, and I think that's something we've talked about in that episode on managing Gen Z as well, which is the degree of uh, sensitivity, I guess, for lack of a better phrase, of many members of that generation and their need for safety. And I think,
Hmm.
exercising this muscle, this mental muscle, is extremely important I mean, we talked about the relationship between mindfulness and resilience.
Hmm.
And everybody can benefit from having more resilience, but it strikes me that given the evidence that we have in front of us in terms of the differences, the intergenerational differences, I think this might be particularly useful for members of Gen Z.
Yeah, it's a great point. And for those leading them, managing them.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, practicing it themselves, but also trying to maybe do, again, some interventions with those in the workforce to say, let's do some practices here that might have positive implications for your own mental well-being. So I
Great.
guess that takes us to our takeaways. What are your takeaways? You want to start?
Reflecting on the whole thing as a whole, it strikes me that spirituality is, people tend to make this distinction between hard and soft management.
Hmm.
And oftentimes it feels like the soft aspects of management are kind of disparaged because you can't really quantify them or measure them accurately.
Hmm.
But to me, it's almost like a source of an untapped source of a whole range of positive impacts on organizations that are extremely tangible and quantifiable. And
Yeah. Yeah.
it probably would have been more so or more true 10 or 15 years ago, because I do think that more and more organizations engage in or actively and consciously try to increase levels of mindfulness or I guess various forms of spirituality amongst their employees. But I still think that this is something that can be enhanced and adopted on a much broader scale, because like we said before, it seems like there's almost no negative consequences to doing that, and a lot of positive consequences. So
Yeah.
my
I think the big
takeaway
takeaway
is,
is almost do it.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
do it.
Yeah. Right. And on a couple fronts, right? One is recognize that the spiritual presentation or the spiritual climate within your organization matters. And so, taking seriously the values that the organization espouses, not that it's not just marketing material that you're sort of distributing to the world, but that if you take it as an important measure of your own organizational climate, are you espousing significant values? Are you giving a sense of meaning and purpose? to the workplace? Are you attending to the need for connectedness? Again, one of our earlier topics with remote work, that's an interesting question, right? Does a move to remote work undermine some of that sense of connectedness or ability to establish connectedness within organizations get undermined with it? And then also on the leadership side, I think there's clear implications that leaders who practice this type of self-reflection and focus on the present have tremendous benefit, experience tremendous benefits in their own performance, but also those of their employees.
Yep. So we are in complete agreement over this.
Do it. And now we know that Uri is spiritual.
Oh. Okay, well, that's great.
Nice.
I don't want to be pinned down and pigeonholed and be known as anything.
Yes, I understand. I understand. All right, let's do our favorite things. All right, so favorite things, we're going to do favorite city.
So it was my idea.
Yes.
And it was my idea, not because I have an answer to what my favorite city is. I don't know why I picked it. I have an answer, but it's a clever answer in the annoying sense of the word. So why don't you go first, and I'll
Mine's going to be boring though, because my favorite city is my hometown of Cleveland, Ohio, which I know is actually your favorite city as well.
The mistake by the lake, the armpit of America. Why is it really your favorite city?
Yeah, but maybe we need to pick a different favorite thing. I don't know, because I mean, it is my hometown, and I think one has a sense of connectedness to one's hometown. That
so were you born there?
Yeah.
And you lived there until what age?
18, and then I went away for 4 years, and then I came back. I could choose Boston. I have lots of friends in Boston. I still love to go back to Boston.
No, that's. I'm very curious to hear why. So it's entirely because it's your hometown, or is there another objective reason?
Well, no, I don't think it's entirely. I love to go back there. I love the social dynamic within the city. I think there's a little bit of an underdog feel associated with Cleveland, right? And some of it is our sports teams. I'm 50 years old, and there's only one championship of any of our teams in that entire time, and there's lots of heartbreak associated with it. And even that one championship was only 7 years ago.
The Cavs, is that right?
The Cavaliers in 2016, yeah. And so as a result, I think the town has a little bit of an underdog feel. You'll occasionally see people say things like Cleveland against the world, and I think the head coach at Ohio State said Ohio against the world a couple weeks back. And so there's a little bit of that bonding around that underdog ethos. I think it much like any city, it has different neighborhoods that have their own distinctive flavor. And I think that's something that I always enjoy when I go home.
What's the movie? It's a great movie, and I thought that the feel of that movie very accurately captured the spirit of Cleveland, because it's kind of an underdog movie about this comic artist. Does that ring a bell?
Oh, so there was a guy, Crumb, was his name R. Crumb? Was he from Cleveland?
Let me look it up real quick.
I think there was a sort of like a underground comics kind of guy who I believe he was a native Clevelander.
Okay, it's called American Splendor. It's about Harvey Pekar.
Harvey Pekar. Okay. I've never seen the movie. That's terrible.
Oh, you should definitely watch it. It's really good. It's
okay.
Paul Giamatti, who is
Paul Giamatti plays Harvey Pekar.
One of my favorite actors. And yeah, it's such a classic underdog movie, and it's set in Cleveland because Harvey Pekar is from Cleveland.
Pekar.
Dude.
Anytime I mispronounce an Israeli name, you make fun of me. So now I get to.
I'm pretty sure Pekar is not an American, whatever that means.
There's no such thing as a Cleveland name. But there's lots of ethnicities that, much like every other city in the Midwest, there was lots of in-migration to the region in the 19th and early 20th century. So we have Lots of Slovenians. Actually, it's the largest population of Slovenians outside of Slovenia. Lots of Croatians, lots of Poles, Italians, Irish. So, you learn how to pronounce some of the names.
At any rate, Paul Giamatti plays the classic anti-hero role in this movie, which I thought profoundly captures the spirit of the city. So you should definitely check it out if you haven't seen it.
I will. I will for sure.
So for folks who haven't been there, what's the one thing that you would recommend people to do when they go to Cleveland? What's the one thing they should see or experience?
So I mean, there's the things that people tend to go to, like the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which is actually a great museum. I love it. And people go to the games. I think if you were to go to it's a fun place to watch a baseball game at Progressive Field. Or a football game at the Brown Stadium. But again, one of the things I love about the city is the various neighborhoods. So, there's and a lot of them have there's actually a really nice culinary scene. So in Ohio City, which is just over the river on the west side of town.
Tremont, is that area?
Oh, Tremont actually, you're right. Tremont has has the big one because that's where Michael Simon opened up a number of his big restaurants when he was first rising to fame. So Tremont, you and I have definitely had a beer in Tremont before back in the day.
Probably.
University Circle, where we spend a lot of our time, and Little Italy, which is just up the hill from University Circle, is a great place to spend an afternoon, have a coffee, sit and people watch.
Yeah.
That has really been redeveloped since we were in school, by the way.
Has it Little Italy?
Yeah. Well, no, University Circle.
Little Italy. I've heard. Yeah. Because when you and I were there, it was a pretty dodgy area. You wouldn't want to hang around there after dark.
Yeah, that's not true anymore.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. Okay.
Can I just say one of my I don't know if like strongest memories from having lived in Cleveland is the West 6 area.
Yeah, so there's still lots of good entertainment areas. So West 6 is still cool. The Flats has been complete. So the Flats is down along the Cuyahoga River, and that when I was a young man was a big entertainment district. And then it fell out of favor, and now it's been redeveloped, and it's really sort of jumping.
And is the population picking up? Is that right?
I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, it is much like any other Rust Belt city. It was I just read a book. That's an interesting book, by the way, called American Demon. If you've ever read Devil in the White City, it's very like Devil in the White City, but it's in Cleveland. And it deals with a very famous series of serial martyrs in the 1930s in Cleveland. But at that time, Cleveland was like, I think, the 8th largest city in the country or 7th largest city in the country. And much like the rest of the Rust Belt, it declined dramatically. But I haven't looked at the population numbers in the last 20 years.
Well, that's good to hear that the place is picking up, because when I was there, yeah, some patches or areas of the city were like pretty desolate. So I remember, the drive from downtown back towards Cleveland Heights or the university area, there was a whole stretch of boarded up houses that was just like there was nothing there. It was kind of depressing to drive past.
That stretch is still a little rough.
Is it?
Yeah, around Cleveland Clinic, which
even before, even closer to the downtown.
Well, around Cleveland Clinic, it's been very what you would call gentrified. So that has been brightened up a little bit, but it's still a pretty rough stretch from the city to University Circle.
Yeah. By the way, speaking of Cleveland, have you watched that show Little Fires Everywhere?
So it's based in Shaker, right?
Yes.
I think I watched an episode or two, and I have to go back and watch more. But it is based in Shaker Heights, which is a inner ring suburb of the city of Cleveland.
It's a very good show.
When I meet people who have family or friends from the area, it's always Shaker. It's always Shaker where people are from. It's kind of wild. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's good. So my favorite city, and I have to say that when I said before that my answer was going to be clever in the annoying sense of the word, I think it's I would pick London, but I pick London just because I experienced London at a certain point in time. So it was my favorite city in the years 2000, 2001 when I lived there. It probably wouldn't be my favorite city today,
You
but
were at LSE?
yeah, I was a student at LSE for a period of time, and I had just left Israel for the first time, so it was my first experience living overseas and kind of getting exposed to different cultures and people from different places. And it was a real eye
I'm reading
opener.
between the lines here. I'm reading between the lines to be this is where you sowed your wild oats, and that's why London is your favorite city.
No, well, no, it was life changing in some very meaningful ways. So you've never lived outside of the U.S., so you're still a virgin that way, I guess. But it's
I'm
really
not gonna offer
revealing.
any commentary.
So it was, as is often the case with Israel, it was a politically tumultuous time back then. And so I was exposed to views of Israel being expressed by people outside of Israel. And
Hmm.
that was, it was revealing because it was just something that I hadn't experienced before. And to hear other people talk so passionately and not necessarily positively about your home country is confronting. But it is an eye-opening experience. And I don't know if many people know the LSE, but it's a school in London where they have
This is the London School of Economics.
and political science or
Oh,
sciences.
sorry.
I never know,
Sorry.
but yes. And so you get students from all over the world. So in many ways, my program there was like kind of like a summer school where I got to hang out with people around my age from various countries all over Europe and beyond. And it was like really fun. I still have good friends that I met there. And and I got to experience the city through this lens of being a student in this, prestigious university and hanging out with people from different countries. And it was all new and exciting. And yeah, it was great.
Yeah, cool. I will say this though, just as a caveat on your earlier comment about my virginity. Um, while I have not lived for an extended time outside the United States, I've spent enough time outside the United States and have enough friends and collaborators who are not US based that I've heard plenty of critiques of my own country by others. Present company not excluded, accepted.
No, I'm not one to shy away from expressing my views, especially with my friends.
That's why I love you. Okay.
Oh,
All right.
we're there. We're there.
Oh, come on.
Expressions of love. I love you too, Sean.
We're old friends. There's nothing wrong with that. Yeah. Okay. Well, good discussion, Ori. I think we can probably wrap it up for tonight.
We'll talk again soon.